She has been called the Queen of Country, a fiery red-haired force who rewrote the rules of Nashville. Reba McEntire sold more than 75 million records, conquered every award her industry could offer, and built an empire that is stretched effortlessly from the dusty rodeo arenas of Oklahoma to the bright, demanding lights of Broadway and Hollywood. But behind the glitter, behind the perfect stage smile and rhinestone gowns, lived a woman who carried wounds that no camera ever captured. For decades, Reba turned heartbreak into harmony, shaping the deepest corners of her personal pain into songs that millions would later claim as their own. Nashville wanted her to keep smiling, to smooth out the rough edges, to bury the storms beneath sequins and polite applause. Yet as the years passed, something inside her changed. At 70, Reba no longer feels the need to hide anything, not the heartbreak, not the betrayal, and especially not the 5 men whose actions shaped her life in ways the public never understood. Some were family, some were mentors or should have been. Others were rivals who underestimated her fire. All of them left marks, some carved deep scars, others lit the spark that would eventually make her unstoppable. This is not a tale of revenge. It is the story of a woman who survived every blow, every doubt, and every silent wound. A story of how 5 men and one cruel twist of fate hardened, sharpened, and ultimately forged the legend the world now calls the true Queen of Country. Reba McEntire entered the world on March 28, 1955, in the rugged, sun-bleached town of McAlester, Oklahoma. She grew up in Chalky, a tiny ranching community where life revolved around cattle, weather, and endless hard work. It was a place where dreams were shaped by dirt roads and long shadows, and where discipline mattered more than imagination. Her father, Clark McEntire, was a legend in his own right, a 3-time world champion steer roper, respected, admired, and feared at home. Her mother, Jacqueline, balanced him out, gentle, steady, the first to recognize that young Reba's voice carried something rare, something powerful. But inside that household of grit and tradition, Reba learned early that love and disappointment could live side by side. Her father didn't believe in music, not as a profession, not as a future, not even as a possibility. In his world, real work meant a sweat, broken fences, and early mornings, not microphones or melodies. Again and again, he dismissed her dreams, sometimes subtly, sometimes bluntly. He told her singing wasn't a real job. He said it was foolishness. And when he was tired or irritated, he even told her she didn't have the talent. To a teenage girl with a voice bigger than the Oklahoma sky, those words cut deep. She adored him, but every silence from him felt like a wound. Every time he brushed off her efforts, something inside her tightened. She sang at the school events, at rodeos, anywhere she could, but the one approval she craved remained unreachable. Even when she studied music at Southeastern Oklahoma State University, his voice followed her like a shadow. It's just a hobby, Reba? Then destiny intervened. In 1974, her performance of the national anthem at the National Finals Rodeo caught the attention of country singer Red Steagall, who helped her record her first demo. That moment opened the door to Nashville. But even as she stepped into the city of dreams, her father's disbelief trailed behind her like a ghost. Every critic's comment echoed his words. Every rejection carried his tone. Years later, she admitted that his doubt became her fuel, the painful engine that kept her pushing harder and rising higher. Clark McEntire wasn't a villain. He was a product of a world that didn't understand dreams, that didn't come with dirt under the fingernails. But to Reba, he became the first man she ever hated, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. His disbelief forced her to become unbreakable. Every award she won was an argument he would never hear. Every ovation was a conversation that would forever remain unfinished. And though she transformed his doubt into success, the deepest part of her always longed for one sentence she never received. I'm proud of you. When Reba McEntire arrived in Nashville in 1975, she stepped into a world built on unwritten rules, smoky offices, and an industry overwhelmingly controlled by men who believed they understood country music better than anyone else. To many of these powerful executives, she was just another polite small-town girl with a nice voice. Hardly a threat, hardly someone worth believing in. Her first record deal should have been a dream come true. Instead, it opened her eyes to the harsh machinery of Music Row. The executives dictated everything: the songs she recorded, the image she presented, the way she sounded. Her own ideas, songs with depth, emotion, and a storytelling, were dismissed before they even reached the table. One man in particular stood at the center of this resistance. He told her plainly that women should stick to simple, upbeat songs, nothing too emotional, nothing too serious. He insisted her ambition was becoming a problem. He became the second shadow in her life, not just a single individual, but the embodiment of an entire system that saw women as ornamental rather than powerful. He believed Reba should be controlled, not listened to. For years, she swallowed her frustration, recording whatever they chose for her. She smiled through it, even when the albums didn't reflect who she truly was. She left studio sessions feeling invisible. Sometimes she cried alone, wondering if she would ever be allowed to sing the songs that lived closest to her heart. But Reba learned to wait, to observe, to use every denial as fuel. Her moment finally came in 1984 with the album My Kind of Country. For the first time, she was allowed to choose her own material, songs rooted in the tradition and raw emotion of her Oklahoma upbringing. The album didn't just succeed, it exploded. Critics called it a revival. Fans heard the real Reba for the first time. Nashville had no choice but to acknowledge her power. When she stood on the CMA stage that year, accepting Female Vocalist of the Year, she wasn't just winning an award. She was reclaiming her voice. She was standing for every woman who had ever been talked over, dismissed, or underestimated. The executive who once silenced her faded into the background, quietly and conveniently forgotten by the industry he once ruled. But Reba never forgot him. She couldn't. He represented every locked door she had to kick open, every insult she alchemized into music. She later said that My Kind of Country wasn't just an album. It was her declaration of war. The Nashville machine had tried to bury her. Instead, she grew right through the concrete. By the late 1970s, Reba McEntire's star was rising, but behind closed doors, her personal life was slipping into a quiet, suffocating storm. In 1976, she married Charlie Battles, a rugged, respected rodeo star more than a decade older than her. To outsiders, their marriage looked like the perfect match. Two Oklahoma souls shaped by grit, dirt roads, and the rodeo life. In the beginning, Charlie was charming, protective, and proud of her growing success. But as Reba's career began to accelerate, something darker started to grow in the shadows of their marriage. Charlie wanted a partner who stayed beside him, not a woman standing on a stage in front of thousands. The more Reba blossomed, the more his pride withered. What should have been shared triumphs became quiet battlegrounds. Reba found herself trying desperately to keep the peace, balancing studio sessions, shows, and long tours with cooking, cleaning, and comforting him afterwards. She tried to be everything he needed, even when it meant burying parts of herself, but nothing quieted his jealousy. Nothing softened the resentment building in him. Every ovation she earned felt to him like a threat. Reba, raised in a family that prized loyalty above all, held on longer than she should have. She tried, again and again, to make the marriage work. But Charlie didn't want compromise. He wanted control. A wife, not a star. By the mid-1980s, Reba was becoming a powerhouse. She was winning awards, releasing hit after hit, and shaping the future of country music. But at home, she was shrinking, slowly, painfully, under the weight of constant arguments, accusations, and emotional pressure. She once said every fight made her feel smaller, as if her success required a personal punishment waiting for her at home. It echoed her childhood. It echoed her father, the love that couldn't celebrate her ambition. Finally, in 1987, after 11 years of a marriage that felt more like a cage, Reba made one of the hardest decisions of her life. She filed for divorce. In conservative Nashville, this was scandalous. Country wives were expected to endure, not escape. Reba walked away with only her horses and her dignity. Friends said it was like watching her step out of a cage and into her own light. Charlie Battles became the third man on her list, not because he didn't love her, but because he tried to shrink her spirit to fit the world he wanted. And yet, she turned even that heartbreak into fire. Her music sharpened. Her performances grew bolder. Her voice carried this strength she had reclaimed. The girl who once sang to win her father's approval now sang to reclaim her freedom. After the emotional wreckage of her first marriage, Reba McEntire finally believed she had found a stability, devotion, and something that felt like true partnership. His name was Narvel Blackstock, her guitarist, her band leader, and eventually the man who would become both her husband and the architect behind the business empire that carried her to global fame. Their relationship grew slowly and naturally, forged on long nights on the road, shared creative visions, and an unspoken understanding that they were stronger together than apart. Unlike the men before him, Narvel believed in her. He respected her voice, her ideas, her instincts, and for the first time, Reba felt she had someone who wasn't threatened by her ambition, but inspired by it. Through the 1990s and 2000s, they became an unstoppable force. She dominated the charts, toured the world, and evolved into a television star with her hit sitcom. She conquered Broadway. She became a household name. And behind the scenes, Narvel kept the engine running, handling logistics, contracts, and 1,000 invisible decisions that allowed Reba to shine effortlessly in the spotlight. She often said she believed they would grow old together, that their love was the rare kind that fame couldn't poison, that they were partners, not just in work, but in life. But then everything shattered. In 2015, after 26 years of marriage, Narvel asked for a divorce. No warning, no preparation, no gentle unraveling of a long partnership. The man she trusted most simply stepped out of the life they had built together, and within weeks, he moved on with another woman. For Reba, it wasn't just heartbreak, it was devastation, the kind that shakes the ground beneath a person's feet. Friends later said she felt blindsided, almost betrayed by her own reality. She had trusted him with her marriage, her career, her fortune, her name, everything. And suddenly it was gone. Reba, ever the private soul, refused to speak harshly of him in public, but those closest to her knew the wound was deeper than any before it. Narvel wasn't just a husband. He had been her anchor, and his departure forced her into one of the most difficult reinventions of her life. She had to manage her entire empire alone. She had to relearn how to move without him. She had to stand up and rebuild again, and she did. Pain transformed into power once more. The woman the world adored refused to let grief silence her. Narval Blackstock became the fourth man on her unspoken list. Not because he was cruel, but because his departure forced her to face a truth she never expected. Even the greatest love can vanish overnight. By the early 1990s, Reba McEntire was no longer just a star. She was the face of country music. Her voice filled radios across America. Her albums topped charts, and her influence stretched far beyond Nashville. But success, especially at that level, doesn't come without shadows. And in Nashville, shadows often wear smiles. Among the many men who shook her hand, praised her publicly, and posed for photos beside her, one stood out. He was a respected singer in his own right, talented, beloved, and deeply admired by fans, but behind closed doors, jealousy twisted his admiration into bitterness. He whispered that Reba's success was manufactured, that her fame was built on marketing, not talent, that her polished image was the work of businessmen, not the result of her own grit, soul, and years of grinding through rejection. Reba ignored him. She had faced worse, and Nashville was a small town with a long memory. She knew rumors always drifted away eventually, but then tragedy struck. On March 16, 1991, one of the darkest nights of Reba's life unfolded. After a show in San Diego, 2 private planes were scheduled to take her band to their next performance. Reba and her husband stayed behind to rest. Minutes after takeoff, one of the planes crashed into Otay Mountain. 7 of her band members died. Her tour manager died. Her musical family, people she saw more than anyone else, were gone in an instant. Reba's world split open. Everything went quiet. She later said she couldn't even absorb the words at first. Her heart simply refused to understand them. For weeks, she barely spoke. She questioned whether she would ever sing again. And while she grieved, shattered, and raw, the rival she had once ignored chose that moment to be cruel. Behind her back, he joked that without her band, she'd never sound the same. It was a knife to the heart of a woman already bleeding. Whispers spread fast, and though she never named him publicly, everyone in Nashville knew who had said it. His words hardened something in her. They didn't break her, but they galvanized her. Months later, after forcing herself to keep breathing, she released For My Broken Heart, an album drenched in loss, resilience, and spiritual survival. The record didn't just succeed, it became one of the defining masterpieces of her career. Every lyric sounded like defiance. Every chorus felt like a quiet declaration. I'm still here. The rival who mocked her pain faded in time, swallowed by his own bitterness. But Reba never forgot him. He became the 5th man on her list, not because he hurt her career, but because he tried to wound her when she was already standing in ashes. And she answered him not with insults, but with music that outlived the man who once tried to diminish her. Some betrayals come from people. Others come from life itself, silent, merciless, and impossible to understand. For Reba McEntire, That final, most devastating betrayal arrived on March the 16th, 1991, the night that split her life into before and after. She had performed in San Diego that evening, tired but happy, surrounded by the band members and road crew who had become her second family. They lived together, prayed together, laughed together, and survived the road together. They were more than co-workers. They were her people. 2 planes were scheduled to fly the band to the next stop of her tour. Reba and her husband, Narvel, stayed behind at the hotel to rest. Minutes after takeoff, the second plane crashed into Otay Mountain. The impact was fatal. 7 members of her band, people she loved like siblings, were gone. Her tour manager was gone. An entire part of her life was taken in one brutal, unthinkable moment. The phone call came just before dawn. Reba later said the world faded out as she listened. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't process. She couldn't even cry at first. The shock was too heavy, too unreal. For weeks, she walked through her days like a ghost. She barely spoke. She barely slept. She wondered if she would ever sing again. Because how do you step back onto a stage when your heart has been torn apart? In those darkest days, she discovered a new kind of hatred, not toward a person, but toward fate itself. She hated that she survived while they didn't. She hated the randomness, the cruelty, the senselessness of it all. She hated how fragile life could be. And yet, she found a way to honor them. Out of that pain, pure, raw, unfiltered, came For My Broken Heart. The album was her tribute, her confession, her lifeline. It sold millions. But that wasn't the point. Its power came from survival, from love, from the promise that their memory would not fade into silence. Reba carried that grief quietly for decades. She never stopped missing them. She never stopped wishing she could go back and change that night. But in time, she turned even fate's cruelty into a strength. Fate tried to silence her, but instead, it gave her another reason to sing. At 70, Reba McEntire stands as more than a legend. She is living proof that pain can forge greatness. The 5 men who doubted, betrayed, and underestimated her, and the devastating twist of fate that nearly ended everything, all became the fire that shaped her. She no longer sings to prove herself. She sings to reveal herself, to remind the world that survival can be beautiful even when it begins in darkness. Now, at 70 years old, Reba McEntire stands with a strength that can only be earned, not taught, not inherited, not borrowed. Her voice still carries the same fire it did decades ago, but now it holds something deeper, wisdom carved from survival, from heartbreak, from battles the public never saw. The 5 men she once hated were never villains in a story of revenge. They were the chisels life used to shape her. They forced her to rise higher, to push harder, to sing louder, to endure. Her father's doubt taught her resilience. The Nashville executive's arrogance taught her defiance. Her first husband's jealousy taught her freedom. Narval's betrayal taught her independence. Her rival's mockery taught her to answer cruelty with brilliance. And fate, the harshest force of all, taught her that love and loss walk hand in hand. Reba no longer tries to hide any of it. She no longer needs to. Pain didn't break her. It refined her. It purified her voice, sharpened her spirit, deepened her songs, and shaped the woman the world now calls the Queen of Country. She sings not because she must prove anything, but because her story deserves to be heard. In the end, her life is not defined by the 5 men she hated. It is defined by how she rose above them. So now the question turns to you. After everything she endured, The doubt, the betrayal, the jealousy, the tragedy. Did these hardships make Reba tougher or simply more unbreakable? Share your thoughts below. And if you want more untold stories of country legends, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned. Because every icon has a truth the world has yet to hear.